Hey, welcome everyone. I'm hoping you are gradually being let in from the lobby into the main meeting room for this afternoon's webinar. We'll just leave it a minute or two to allow people to join and then we'll get going, but hopefully in the right place. This is the webinar to launch the shared standards for water efficiency in local plans. And you can see on the screen, if you've not seen the actual shared standards document, that's already been published, and you can either scan the QR code or you can click on the link, and hopefully that will take you straight there. We've got a fantastic audience, first of all. Already got almost 100 people in the room. We're expecting, I think, about double that registered. So hopefully, really great set of attendees from different sectors, and also a fantastic lineup of speakers this afternoon to take you through the shared standards. Okay, I'll just leave it one more minute and we'll get going. If people want to start to maybe introduce themselves, if they're joining as attendees, hopefully you've got access to both the chat and the Q&A function. I'll explain what each of those are for in a moment. But in the chat, you might like to introduce yourself. Just say, who you are, what organisation you represent, and maybe what kind of role you have within the planning system in water efficiency, in new homes, in building standards, that kind of thing. So yeah, please use the chat to introduce yourself just in the minute before we get going. And Alice is one person who can't hear anything, but I'm hoping that the only person, hoping everybody else is okay. If you have any technical issues, then usually the best way is, unfortunately, thank you, Leslie, that's great to confirm. Yeah, you can hear me. It's usually best to leave Teams and to come back in. Teams isn't always the best platform, but it's the best that we have. Okay, let's get going. A couple of minutes past the hour. So welcome everybody to this launch webinar this afternoon, where we're going to take you through the shared standards for water efficiency in local plans developed in partnership between Natural England, the Environment Agency, and all 4 water companies that operate and provide services within the East of England. WRE is delighted to host this afternoon's workshop and to have supported the development of these shared standards over recent months. You'll note on the screen already that the shared standards themselves, the document, the report that underpins them, it's already been published, so you can scan the QR code or you can click on the link and it will take you straight there. In terms of just a bit of housekeeping before we really get going, microphones should have been set to off when you join the forum. So please, keep your microphone off. You can turn your camera on if you wish, or keep it off if you don't. And you can use the Teams chat if you have any general points you wanted to raise or any technical difficulties, and Alice in the background from WRE will help you get through those if she possibly can. We do have a Q&A function as well live today, so if you've got questions at any point in this afternoon session, please put them into the Q&A, and then other people can see what you're asking, and you can also vote for each other's questions, and that will be key when we get to the panel Q&A. If you can't see the Q&A function because you might have joined this session through a browser or maybe on your phone, you can put your questions into the chat function and then Alice will paste those into the Q&A. And just to confirm that this afternoon's session is being recorded, and both the slides and the recording will be posted to WRE's website probably tomorrow. So other people who couldn't join us in the end will be able to watch it back afterwards. The agenda this afternoon, so you've got about 2 hours with a comfort break halfway, mainly to go through, first of all, the reasons why we need shared standards of water efficiency within the East of England, with Louise, Gemma and Liam, respectively from Natural England and from the Environment Agency, taking us through that kind of the background, the evidence base for why we need shared standards. And then from a water company perspective, we've got Jonathan Gleeran from Anglian Water about how water scarcity impacts upon public water supplies and some of the choices and trade-offs they have to make day to day when they get new requests for water. And then George Warren, who's one of the leading architects of the Enabling Water Smart Communities project, will draw from some lessons from that exciting innovation project that's been running for a couple of years now. Again, why supporting, why to develop shared standards for water efficiency in new homes to support growth and environmental improvement. And after the comfort break, we'll actually get to the main event where Caroline from the Environment Agency will launch the shared standards report and the underpinning evidence base and explain exactly how it can be used. And then all the speakers will join us for a panel Q&A session for about half an hour or so toward the end of this 2-hour slot. But before we get going, I thought I'd first of all post 3 pictures on the screen and set you a little bit of challenge, a little bit of a quiz. So if you can link these 3 people. So why have I chosen these 3 to talk about at the beginning of this afternoon session? And also why have I picked these particular dates? So what is it that links these people and these dates with the shared standards that we're going to be talking about this afternoon? And to skip the end, because it may take you a while to kind of figure all this out, but in 2006, it was Ruth Kelly, who was Communities and Local Government Secretary at the time, who launched the Code for Sustainable Homes. Do you remember that? The Code for Sustainable Homes, which was 6 different levels of housing standards, from talking about net zero and water efficiency, with challenging standards at the very weakest from 120 litres per person per day in new homes, through 105 in the middle tiers to 80 litres per person per day in the upper tiers. But unfortunately, Eric Pickles, now Lord Pickles, killed the Code for Sustainable Homes in 2015 and instead said, what we need across the country is a much simpler standard for building regulations and standards for water efficiency that are consistent across the whole country. We need to create a level playing field. But in doing so, he set standards at quite a weak level, 125 litres per person per day in building regulations with an optional standard of 110. And because of that, local planning authorities, not just in the east, but across the whole country, have struggled to tighten standards beyond and improve upon 110, because the planning inspectorate have said, well, that's not in line with national policy. You can't expect developers in your area to beat national standards, and therefore those local plans didn't go through. So what happened in response to that was, first of all, Anglian Water with Natural England and the Environment Agency about 3 or 4 years ago issued a first set of joint guidance to planning authorities within the Anglian Water region, promoting at least the 110 litres per person per day standard as the one that should be adopted within local plans. And that was a very successful exercise, because most planning authorities, if not all planning authorities now, have adopted that 110 litres per person per day standard as an absolute minimum. And that's where we were, planning authorities wanting to go beyond 110, but being kicked back by the planning inspectorate. And that's until 2013 and Cambridge happened. So Michael Gove was Communities and Local Government Secretary in December 2023, when clearly growth ambitions for Cambridge were starting to become unstuck, because the Environment Agency quite rightly was objecting to housing development, new cancer research hospitals, other types of non-household development, because there wasn't enough water to be found for those new water needs, and there was a risk of deterioration to the chalk aquifers and the groundwater sources. So what Michael Gove did in December 2023 was issue a written ministerial statement which deleted the statement that Eric Pickles made in 2015, and said instead that planning authorities should both be able to negotiate tighter water efficiency standards with new developments as they come through one by one, and also to adopt new planning standards, tighter water efficiency standards within their local plans that go beyond building regulations. And that was a really positive move. And there's examples now of planning authorities across the east negotiating tighter standards of 110 with those housing developments as they arise. But what today's planning shared standards do is 2 really, really important things. First of all, it extends the geographic scope of the previous standard that was mainly Anglian Water, so that all 4 water companies within the WR region now fully support and endorse the standard. So we've got an expansion in geographic scope, and also we are tightening the standards from 110, as you'll hear, to 85 litres per person per day, which is a big step forward, but hopefully a very pragmatic and achievable step forward in order to make sure that new housing development is as water efficient as it possibly can be. But that's probably more than enough in terms of a history lesson. Let's move now to introduce Louise Bardley from Natural England to take us through the background to the shared standards being launched this afternoon. Thank you, Louise.
It's going to be Liam first. Because Liam from the Environment Agency is going to go first, aren't you?
Yeah, Yeah, hello everyone. Yeah, the first session is a session that we've titled Water for People, the Environment and Growth. And I'm pleased to say you're not going to have to listen to me for the whole presentation. There's three of us going through this. We'll be chopping and changing as we go. So my name's Liam. I'm a planning specialist at the Environment Agency, and I focus on all things water resources and have a specific interest in Cambridge. Now, because we're going to be chopping around as we go, I propose we just introduce everyone that's going to speak now. So if I hand over to Gemma, if you want to introduce yourself as well, please.
Yeah, I'm Gemma. I'm a planning specialist with the Environment Agency. I often refer to Liam as my better half in the water resource as well, because we share the portfolio. But loosely, we're kind of east-west based, but it just works out that we tend to do whatever crops up. Louise?
Hi, I'm the interloper in this session. I'm from Natural England and my name's Louise Barsley and I'm the Principal Officer on Water Scarcity.
Great, thank you both. Right, so I'll get us going then. So I thought it'd be useful to start with a bit of background as to what the situation is in the east of England. So yeah, the east of England receives around 600 mil of rainfall per year. Now this is approximately 2/3 of the UK's national average. I think something that's really interesting here is when you start to look at other countries that you might think are much drier than us. For example, Greece receives 652 millimeters of water a year, Senegal 638, and Spain 636. So yeah, it really does show how dry we are in this part of the country. You may have seen this before. This is published on the gov.uk website. Basically shows that the entirety of our area and the area that's going to be covered by the shed standards for water efficiency is designated as an area of serious water stress. Gemma, over to you.
Yeah, so just, a little bit of background. We know that water scarcity is already something that we're concerned about in our area. So actually, we are trying to claw back in some areas abstraction licenses and mean that there's less pressure on the system and there's a little bit more water for growth. So there's a little bit more water for the environment and we can facilitate nature recovery through there being more water. And then you've got growth on top of that. So we're kind of adding additionally to a problem, but we want to make sure that it's done sustainably and in the right way that supports everybody and gets the best communities for everybody. Louise?
Next slide, please. And you can go straight to the next slide. So I'm going to focus on impacts on nature initially and talk about the national picture and then bring it right down to the area that the shared standards are in. So thriving plants and wildlife is the apex target of our statutory environmental improvement plan, and that has to be supported by clean and plentiful water. And we need to improve at least 75% of our waters to be close to their natural state. And these are all targets in the environmental improvement plan. Next slide, please. Water is really important for achieving the targets in the environmental improvement plan. So the white targets here are from the Environmental Improvement Plan. The slides in green are actually in the Environment Act themselves, and they tend to get a little bit lost. About 40% of the species that are being assessed in the species abundance target are freshwater dependent. And the 75% protected sites target by 2042, to put that in perspective, 70% of all sites of special scientific interest have freshwater dependent features. And they're really not doing very well. The 22% of our protected lakes and only 12% of our protected freshwater rivers are in favourable condition. And 64% of our rivers suffer from water resource pressures, although that's not all abstraction, as do 80% of our upland and 40% of our lowland, 53% of our lowland bogs, but it's not all abstraction, that includes drainage. Next slide, please. So our sites are not doing very well nationally, and we're going to struggle to meet these targets if we don't do something pretty urgently about water supply to nature. So East Anglia reflects the shared standards area, East Anglia, which I know it goes a little bit outside of East Anglia, reflects the national picture. You've got 239 water-dependent sites. 96% of them, 96 of them, not 96%, have water abstraction pressures on them. And for a very dry area, your nationally and internationally protected sites are very water dependent. You've got virtually every type of water dependent feature that it's possible to designate legally, except for those that only occur in the uplands. So you've got open water habitats, lakes, ponds, rivers, ditches. You've got wetland habitats, fens, mires, bogs, reed beds, wet grasslands, grazing marsh, dune slats, wet heath and wet woodland. Like I said, everything. Breeding wintering birds and their plant and their assemblages that rely on wetlands, wetland plants and their assemblages. My favourite, the fenraft spider over there, invertebrates and their assemblages, amphibian species and their assemblages, and fish species. So really diverse. Next slide, please. And it isn't just protected sites. It's also how we manage to meet our net zero targets that needs us to tackle water scarcity. East Anglia contains a very large amount of lowland peat. This is the England Peat Map portal, which is free of charge and accessible online. And East Anglia contains a very large proportion of the lowland peat. And it's the single largest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions from land use, is drying peat. And if we don't re-wet our peat, if we leave enough water to wet our peat, we can reduce those carbon emissions. We can achieve net zero because we can't without it. We can increase water quality benefits. We can increase flood mitigation, improve resilience to drought, improve nature recovery, reduce wildfire risk. Very bad wildfire season this year started early, especially in the north with the drought they're having there, and improves longevity of soils. So and if all that wasn't enough, I'm going to pass over to EA colleagues for yet more impacts on wildlife.
Sorry, you're on mute, Gemma.
Well done, Gemma. Ah, dear. So we're really hammering home the impacts on the environment today. You can see this is environmental flow indicators. Some of the stuff is obviously in our area. Liam, if you want to move me on. And we thought, well, you might not be able to see where your backyard is from that picture. So we've picked out some rivers from the Catchment Data Explorer. And these are all actually not achieving good status due to pressures on water. If you do want to go and find your local river and see if it's pressured by water, you can go on the Catchment Data Explorer for the Water Framework Directive and have a look if you do want to find what's going on in your local water body. Liam?
Thanks, Gemma. Yes, so changes in river flow and groundwater levels can have numerous different effects on ecology and habitats. So, for example, I'll just name a few. So reduced flows will change the shape of rivers and the geomorphology of the river system, which can alter natural river habitats and in particular can disadvantage species that need fast flowing or deeper water. You might also see rivers drying up more frequently than they would naturally, and something we're seeing quite a lot over the news at the moment with the recent sunny weather. Reduced flows can also exaggerate the impacts of barriers such as weirs, and in turn can affect migratory and non-migratory species. Deposition of fine sediments can be increased along flowing water, and this can affect sensitive species. So too much abstraction can also lead to unsustainable water bodies with reduced resilience during prolonged dry weather. And yeah, reduction in water levels can also prevent overtopping and inundation of the floodplain, which in turn can impact on the life cycles of species requiring floodplain habitats. You may also see things like increased risk of toxic algal blooms, especially during drought conditions and warm temperatures. And finally, altered flows may change water temperature, which can again have an impact on river ecology and habitat. I think we're back over to you again, Louise.
Yeah, so I'm going to touch on impacts on people. So if you go on to the next slide, it's not all just about nature. But good quality nature is in good quality water and wetland blue spaces is important for people. How important? They can literally help you live longer. Is this hyperbole? No. Natural England's connecting people with nature work does lots of empirical studies. And the following are a snapshot from large-scale meta-analyses and literature reviews of empirical studies that were held to the same standards as they hold cancer studies. There's very similar sort of analytical techniques. Exposure to nature is associated with lower all-cause mortality. You can live longer, it lowers stress empirically, improves heart rate and blood pressure, and improves well-being. And I think what's really stunning is access to blue spaces for some groups can improve mental health benefits more than green spaces alone. And this is particularly true for teenagers. And I don't know much about your area's child mental health services, but in where I live, it's particularly problematic. So it's a really important societal benefit. And inland blue space visits were associated with lower likelihood of using anxiety medications. These are all proven, and the links we can always provide you with the links, and they're all freely available, all these studies, on Natural England's Access to Evidence catalogue. So they're really valuable to people. They're also valued by communities. Next slide, please. The half the British population interacts with blue space at least once a month. It visits blue space, reflect the seasons. They tend to go more in the summer. And locally, these are both from this year in the shared standards region, both of these slides. People are getting more and more vocal about how much they love their rivers, their streams, their lakes, their wetlands. Next slide, please. And a really good quality green and blue spaces, but particularly blue spaces, are essential for the economy of East Anglia. This is a report from this year. The region's economy depends heavily on sectors sensitive to climate impacts, including agriculture, energy and tourism. All three of those sectors use a lot of water, and a healthy wet water and wetland environment will help support that. And it also says that East Anglia's leadership in sustainability presents a unique opportunity for productivity improvements and growth in the area, which is really important. So I'm going to go back we're going to have to do a dry legal bit now. So I'm really sorry about that, but I'm going to pass over to Liam, I think, or Gemma.
Yeah, thanks, Louise. Yeah, I've drawn the short straw, I think.
It's incredibly exciting. We love it.
Yeah, just to go through a little bit of the legislation. I thought I'd touch on the NPPF, the National Planning Policy Framework, that most of you should be aware of and use day to day already. But just wanted to flag that the NPPF does require a proactive approach to mitigating and adapting to climate change, including water supply. But one of the key bits of legislation that kind of affects everything we're talking about today is the Water Environment Regulations 2017, otherwise known as WFD, Water Framework Directive. Now, they require all public bodies, so this would come upon ourselves in the Environment Agency in Natural England, as well as decision makers in local planning authorities. So it basically shows that we must all have due regard to the objectives of this framework to support water bodies in achieving or maintaining good status. And you'll also find river basin management plans set out how this can be achieved. And again, going back to the NPPF, it does require local planning authorities to take into account river basin management plans in their decision making. Now, some of you may be aware of sustainability reductions, but essentially in terms of abstraction licenses that the EA regulates. So the Environment Agency have been reducing or capping some public water supply abstraction licenses to prevent deterioration. Now, this only applies where current abstractions are likely to be unsustainable. Now, what this means in practice is the reductions in licensed quantity. The reductions in the licensed quantity of water required to prevent deterioration has resulted in a reduction in licensed headroom available. And where there have been surpluses, these may have been reduced. Now, the next slide goes into this a little bit further, and it also includes a nice, or not so nice, however you think of it, a map that shows the water resource zones in question, where licenses may have been capped or reduced. So the EA is doing this to try and bring some of these abstractions back into compliance. And you'll see listed on the page some of the individual water resource zones where this can affect. In some cases, the water companies may apply like an overriding public interest case, where they may say that it's essentially not possible to abide by that cap by the required dates, and these caps are therefore deferred. So therefore, in these cases, we need to be mindful that abstraction to supply growth could cause deterioration in the wider environment. And I'm back over to you now, Louise.
Yeah, so this is over to the bits of nature recovery legislation and protection that we're in charge of. And so our approach, Natural England's approach, our strategic solution to water scarcity nationally, including the shared standards area, is called the plan-led approach. And that's because what we try and do is identify where abstractions are affecting habitats regulation sites that are protected for nature, and SSSIs, and ensure that through very robust advice to the water resources management plans, to the water companies, that they include options in their plans that would enable those licence abstractions to be removed. And that doesn't always happen straight away. So in addition to that, what we're asking is that they include options in their plan, and this is almost always demand management, so water efficiency, that now enable licence amendments. The water companies write the plans, DEFRA, Secretary of State, or the competent authority for water resource plans. The regulator for licences is an Environment Agency. So in parallel to the water resource plan advice, we were also working with the EA, and we worked very closely with them all the way through this, to ensure that that licence capping could occur, and they make a commitment to the licence cap to remove the licence headroom where the increase in that licensed headroom would damage protected sites. And the third part of that is where and we've been doing this for 2 years nearly, and that's sort of happening in most places. But the third part of this is the water efficiency in local plans, where those options include demand management that enable the licence changes to occur. Then we will negotiate with local planning authorities to do water efficiency in local plans. The next slide, please. So this is the habitats regulations. This is what everybody will want to know about. So this is the advice. So company plans, water company plans, must not add to, cause, or make harder to remove adverse effect risks. That's adverse effect or cannot conclude no, to supply growth. The EA must ensure this is the case as the regulator by licence modifications where there is licence headroom. This provides the local planning authorities with certainty that they can rely on the water resource plan for what's in there. Water efficiency measures and mitigation measures must be considered if there is an existing adverse effect risk from abstraction. So that's the water company plans, and we've been doing that. It's taken a while with all water companies that have relevant licenses. LPAs must satisfy themselves that nature obligations are met, but a lot of your heavy lifting with regards to the habitats regulations has been done as part of the plan-led approach. So next slide, please. This is my last slide. So if we've done the plan-led approach and there's being these licence amendments, why do we need water efficiency at all? Well, demand management, including water efficiency, are important parts of the plan-led approach because they enable the licence amendments. And if development is outside of the water resource management plan, either by timing it's additional than was planned for in the plan, and some of this will be explained in water company presentations, or it's additional in terms of scope, such as non-domestic water supply, then it's not covered by the plan-led approach. And we need water efficiency to make sure that this additional water doesn't undermine these these improvements that we've secured. And some suspected pressures are not yet covered by the plan-led approach because we don't have the data to get them there. And water efficiency will help towards all of those, like the peat rewetting, the species abundance targeting, and some protected sites are not covered either yet. It's not to say they won't be in future rounds, but they're not covered yet. Okay, that's it for us. And I think we're on to water companies now.
Yeah, I was going to introduce Jonathan. If Jonathan wants to turn your camera on just whilst you're doing that, and just to kind of reinforce, I suppose, how important this is, in terms of kind of water efficiency. Did some quick calculations earlier, and if the co-sustainable homes had been kind of carried on from 2015 and applied to the 1.6 million homes that have been built since over the last 10 years at those kind of weaker standards because of Lord Pickles, we might not need a big strategic reservoir. It makes a difference between needing a strategic reservoir costing billions of pounds and not. So the worst thing that we can do now is continue with standards that are weak and apply them in the way that they have been, because say it's like the kind of tree planting approach. The best time to have changed water efficiency standards were 10 years ago. Because that didn't happen, then now is obviously the next best. So we've heard from Natural England, we've heard from the Environment Agency, and now to Jonathan, if you can take control and take us through from your perspective.
So can I just check, Daniel, you can see my slides?
Yes, they all look great.
Yeah, good. So it's working. Brilliant. So good afternoon, everybody. So for those who don't know me, I'm Jonathan Glerum. I'm Head of Sustainable Growth at Anglian. I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to whiz through these slides, and some of them you will have seen before, and certainly Liam has touched on, I suppose, the challenges that we have in the east of England and how dry we are. And I think what was also discussed previously was the challenge around growth. So the demand for water is growing significantly. So we have some of the fastest growing towns and cities in the region. We know there are a number of new towns that are coming to the region as well. As I'll cover on the next slide, obviously the government's growth ambition at the moment is really quite significant. So couple all of that with the changing patterns of weather that we've got, climate change and so forth, and we do find ourselves with some significant challenges in front of us. So just to set some context from the I suppose government growth mission perspective, Louise, I think you said, obviously public expectations are changing around our blue and green spaces, as are the environmental standards, which everyone's touched on as well previously. So we've got that kind of double prong approach kind of coming at us in terms of the need for us to do better and support the environment more, coupled with the additional housing targets that we've got in the next 4 or 5 years. So for us, within our region, that's an extra 75,000 homes that we need to find capacity for. And the key thing here is that obviously those targets have come after our final determination. So those are numbers that came after we had planned and got agreement with our regulator about what we would deliver. So we need to find a way to work collaboratively with others to enable and support that growth if we can. So linked with the regulator, we are not funded to kind of sit on spare capacity. So we work to the sort of forecasts that we've got, and then we build from there. So I think, Louise, you also mentioned that the kind of non-household side of things, and I've got a slide on this in a bit, but there's been significant increase in non-household demand, and more so than was forecast. So particularly, I think, as certain industries have brought things back kind of onshore, as it were, to deliver stuff in the UK, and that's seen a big increase and much more so than was predicted. So in terms of managing water demand, I'm sure many of you will have seen this, whether it's kind of the WRE regional plan or our own water resources management plan. I think the thing that really strikes me when I look at this is just the sheer scale of the potential deficit. So it's up to 90 megalitres per day. in some parts of the region, and whether that's from a WRE perspective, looking at everything, or from our side of things, looking at public water supplies. So, and that box in the middle, is really rings true. We really need some urgent action, and that's not just for the water companies to do. That is all sectors to play their role. So. And again, many of you will have seen this before, but this kind of supply-demand balance that we think about when thinking about water supplies. Now, the numbers you see on here are this is supply-demand balance for the Anglian Water area, but you could apply sort of similar principles for any of the kind of water companies in the area. So and not least in some of the things that Louise and Liam and Gemma were just talking about. What are driving some of the kind of reduction in availability of water. So things around the licence caps and the environmental destination, and all for the right reasons to support and protect the environment. But obviously that gives us a challenge. On top of that, apply the need for our kind of strategy duties around drought and to deal with climate change, and then obviously factoring in growth. But again, as I said earlier, the growth figures that we've got within this supply demand balance on the screen at the moment won't have factored in the uplift of the kind of government growth mission. So we need to find a way to kind of balance that, which you see on the right hand side of the screen, and we can either do that through demand management, or we can do that through supply. And I'll just I'll touch on both shortly. Just to pick up on the non-domestic water side of things, though, because this is quite important for us at the moment. So we also have to provide, and we have a statutory duty to provide water for domestic purposes. So that's whether that be new homes or for for domestic purposes in non-household properties. So a new factory goes up, we have a duty to supply the taps and the sinks and the toilets within those organisations, but we don't have a duty to supply the non-domestic side of any processes that they're developing. So what that means is, at the moment, we are having to kind of restrict and sort of manage what is available, and that's partly due to the increase in demand. So I mentioned earlier the significant demand, and you see there. So that's gone up by 28 million litres in just the last 6 months, so per day. So really significant increase in demand that we're seeing from organisations across the east of England, and as such we are limiting new water requests to 20 megalitres per day, so across the whole of the region. So that will obviously help us kind of manage that demand there, and the ability, but obviously that has a knock-on impact on the ability to grow across the region, which obviously we want to try and support wherever we can. So in terms of our own supply side of things, you'll be well aware, I'm sure lots of you will be aware of some of the significant new infrastructure that will be coming to the east of England. So you can see on the slides there a number of the kind of the red and the green lines, or the pink and the green lines. They're the new kind of interconnectors, so the new pipeline that's coming from the north of the region right down across the east and the south. You'll obviously be aware of the new reservoirs as well that are coming, both in Lincolnshire and in Cambridgeshire. And then there are other opportunities around things like reuse. And George will touch on the kind of household reuse opportunities shortly, but there are other kind of larger scale reuse opportunities, like the one we're looking at in Colchester at the moment, to take final effluent into supplies. So there are lots of options that we can manage and are hoping to deliver around the supply side, and where I suppose we are looking to work collectively going forward is looking at that kind of demand side of things. So and there's a few ways that we're doing that. So I'll touch on the share standards in a second, but there are other ways as well. So whether it be kind of incentives that we have in place to try and support developers to get as low a level of kind of water supply as possible, whether it's the work that we're doing through enabling water smart communities, which George will touch on in a moment, or whether it's these new shared standards, they're all opportunities to help us deliver tighter water efficiency standards. So, and the opportunity to kind of link that into local plans is really significant. And I think for me, as we look to the longer term, and as the kind of incumbent water company for much of the area, thinking about how we link those local plans in with our own kind of statutory duties around developing our water resources management plan and our drainage and wastewater management plan, and our broader long-term planning that we do, looking out both in terms of what will be PR29 and the next kind of 5-year period, but also much longer than that, is really, really important. So the work that we can do together collectively to do that will be really significant, and these shared standards really sort of cement that and support this work, which I really commend. So thank you very much. So Daniel, I'll leave it there, and I will now hand over to George.
Fantastic. Yeah, and it's also just again to encourage people to post questions into the chat, or rather in the Q&A function if possible. There's lots already in there, including about how practical is it to go beyond 110 litres per person per day. What is actually within the art of the possible? How much might it cost? And I guess that's exactly what enabling water smart communities has started to test. So, George, over to you.
Thank you very much, Daniel, and hopefully you can hear me and see me in that regard. So afternoon all, I'm George Warren, I'm the Integrated Water Manager here at Anglian Water, and I'm going to take you on a little journey through our Enabling Water Smart Communities project, if I may. And this is mindful of the fact that this fed in as partial evidence towards this shared standards, but may well be looking at kind of the future iterations of. But let's just give you a brief overview as to what Enabling Water Smart Communities is. It's an Ofwat innovation funded project that looks at identifying and breaking down the barriers to integrated water management in new residential development. It is led by Anglian Water, with a number of different partner organisations, including other water companies, academic institutions, and relevant bodies in the development sector. We also have an independent programme board, which we meet with on a quarterly basis. This is ostensibly to make sure that we don't reinvent the wheel and are aware of any upcoming consultations or emerging legislation that we should be aware of, and also have champions in the right places. So yeah, we meet on a quarterly basis with them just to report back as to what's going on and to hear about other things that may well be of relevance to the project. It's a large project. It will in total be about 4 years worth of work. We're about 3 years in now, so I'm not going to go through absolutely everything included within it today. I would encourage you to have a look at our website if you get a chance. I'm going to focus in on actually the water reuse side of things, noting though that water reuse at present within residential properties for domestic purposes, I should say, currently is not, we're unable as a water company to provide anything other than potable drinking water to domestic properties, and that is due to an interpretation of the Water Industry Act 1991, and the Water Quality Regs 2016, and the Private Water Supply Regs as well 2016, which has been interpreted by the Drinking Water Inspectorate to effectively prevent us from providing anything other than wholesome water. Now, some of you on the line will be going, well, hang on a second, I've definitely seen rainwater harvesting supply certain domestic uses. Now, this is down to either the fact that you can do it on an individual case-by-case basis, so a property can harvest its own rainwater or harvest its own grey water and reuse it for non-potable uses. But if you want to do it on a communal basis, if it comes under a community supply, then it should be under Drinking Water Inspectorate's regime. But often when it's within an existing building curtilage, that comes under local government, and it hasn't necessarily been enacted in the same way. I could safely say that the government are aware of this. They understand that there's an issue here, and there are movements afoot to try and address this. And we look forward to that being resolved quite quickly, we hope, within the next 12 months, so that we can start to see non-wholesome water being delivered or non-potable water being delivered to residential properties. But hopefully you can see there's other things that may well be of interest to those on the call. But let's hone in on the reuse side of things, if I may. So an initial piece of work that we did was looking at the economic impact of the housing, of water scarcity on housing within the east and southeast of the region, looking at the additional 1.5 million homes that the new government at the time had stipulated, and looking at what impact that might have in this region in terms of water scarcity and how that may delay things. I suppose, cutting long story short, quite a significant impact actually in terms of the potential to delay housing within the region. Of over 61,000 properties we estimated as being delayed as a result of the lack of water resource availability, which actually has a significant impact on the economy, with £25 billion worth of loss associated with this government. And then we thought we would run that if all those properties were to be delivered at 30% more efficient. So both the additional 1.5 million and the existing growth proposed, if we were to deliver those at 30% more efficient, which in litre per person per day speak is around the 80 litres per person per day. Note that we're not going this low because we believe that 80 requires reuse. Then you're going to unlock, build back that best part of 20 billion and deliver far more of those properties that are estimated for the region. Ostensibly, there's quite a significant economic case for such things. Let me just move forward. So we then set about looking at a business case for water reuse. So if we were to incorporate water reuse within new development, how much would that cost per property? So we took 12 development sites ranging from 40 to 600 properties, and 9 property typologies ranging from 1-bedroom apartments up to 5-bedroom detached houses, and set about looking at redesigning these with an additional collection, treatment, external network and internal pipe work, and went out to the supply chains to get quotations on those. So we got a minimum of 3 associated with each of the different developments and different aspects of it to come up with a reasonable indicative cost associated with both rainwater, stormwater harvesting, and grey water recycling. From a rainwater and stormwater perspective, stormwater being not just the rain, the water that lands on the roofs, but also on the hard surfaces. Actually, even at 40 properties, it was more efficient and more cost efficient to be delivering at a community scale than individual plot by plot basis. We worked out it's around, and it gets at about 100 properties or more. That's when it really hits the perfect point, and you're looking at about £2,000 additional cost per property for a community scale reuse system. But if you were to do that on an individual plot by plot basis at rainwater harvesting level, then it's around 4,000. I should also add that by doing it on a community system, you've got far more resilience and potentially a larger yield. So you will definitely be able to meet your demands. Whereas on an individual plot by plot basis, that does require quite a considerable tank size per property, given the rainfall that we've already discussed in this. From a grey water recycling perspective, actually that flips then. It is more cost efficient to be delivering it on a property by property basis compared to community, other than where it is a heavily dense development around this sort of 60 to 80 dwellings per hectare. That sort of base, actually it starts to be that grey water recycling works on a community scale. That makes sense. The more dense the development, the shorter the pipe lengths associated with per property, and therefore the lower the cost. But we were looking around sort of £6,000 on a community, which can decrease to about 2.5 for those dense developments, or a similar sort of cost for grey water recycling per property as it would be for rainwater harvesting, and that's down to the storage requirements. So key takeaways from that study, though, the internal pipework itself was only around the £350 additional cost per property, and I would suggest that if we want to future-proof properties so that we don't have to go back in and retrofit that additional pipework at a later date, which could be very costly and quite disruptive, then by implementing that additional pipework now, we will certainly be safeguarding and future-proofing those properties for that non-potable water supply for the likes of WC flushing and washing machines and the likes. And I would be encouraging building regs to be considering this by mandating such things in there. The density makes a big difference. As mentioned before, we could optimize the SUDS design to provide a lot of that attenuation and storage for rainwater harvesting, which would help to reduce that cost even further for the stormwater harvesting. And it should be pointed out that the additional cost associated with stormwater harvesting is in a similar ballpark to many of the environmental incentives regimes that are out there at present. Angling Water have not gone down this route yet. We do have one out there for 90 litres. They're offering up £500 per property, and we're going to be revising that in the near future off the back of this work to potentially offer something up for reuse, noting the fact that at the present time it still isn't, we're still unable to provide it ourselves. We did provide a roadmap to this, and it's worth noting that this came about through a grouping of regulators and water companies coming together to create this. I won't, this will be shared and is already on our website detailing out the things that have been considered within it. But one thing to note is the need for a single source of truth, because there's a lot of ambiguity around this. So we have created a single source of truth document, which I'll go into in a second. The other thing is that this consultation around wholesome water really needs to be resolved ASAP to allow for this to occur. We're also doing a piece of work around competent person scheme. So we're looking at the skills gap associated with delivering reuse at scale. But just on the single source of truth, this is basically going, report is attempting to pull together, serve as a single source of truth, trying to navigate the current legislative and regulatory requirements and guidance for water reuse schemes. If honest, it's proved quite challenging. There are areas of huge ambiguity, and possibly because water reuse was not envisaged when the primary legislation was drafted. And despite best attempts, it would appear to have proved difficult to overlay new guidance into a regime that's already complex and enforced by different entities. We've pulled it together in a single document. We've given it some guidance and what's in date and what's out of date, and we've drawn around sort of coding and signage and the likes, and water quality requirements. So some of the key recommendations that came out of that document, which is posted on our website already, and this is the Enabling Water Smart Communities website, I might add, is we need to provide that coherent response to the consultations that are upcoming, and I would encourage those on the call to do similar around the need for reuse. We need to have a look at how people can gain access to a lot of the documentation that's needed in the guidance, because a lot of it sits behind a paywall from a British Standards perspective, which really, if we're encouraging such things, we need to allow for access to such. We have identified some of the gaps and are looking to address those within Enabling Water Smart Communities, and looking at how we can continue through on the risk assessment side of things. So have pulled together a draft water safety plan template for reuse that identifies all the risks and hazards and looks at potential mitigation measures. This can be lifted and shifted to use for any water company across the country, and can help to address some of the frequently asked questions around some of the risks involved. So all of this stuff is available on the Enabling Water Smart Communities website. And this is the idea of this. Once we can get over this wholesome water barrier, then it's about how do we can take this beyond the 85, and that should be the evidence necessary to help support such measures. But ultimately, wouldn't it just be easier if it was in building regs and mandated for it to avoid the need for it to be included within every single person's local planning authority's local plan? I think that's probably enough from me, Daniel.
That's brilliant, George. Thank you very much. And you're right about building regulations. We're still expecting a consultation from government on tightening water efficiency standards in building regs. They've been promising it for some time now, let's say, and who knows, it might pop up. But will it be as tight to the standards that we're setting out today? I'm not sure they will be. Will they unlock overnight water reuse? Hopefully, but maybe not, because there does also need to be the change in that water regulations that you mentioned. But I know that government officials are also thinking about that very closely too. Right, well, perfectly on time. Well done, everyone, for the speakers so far to keeping us absolutely on track for the agenda. And we've allowed ourselves a little 5-minute break, if that's okay. So don't leave the call. Switch your kind of cameras off if your speakers speak. Put yourselves on mute. Grab a cup of tea, comfort break, and I'll see you back here at 3 p.m. Hey, it's 3 p.m. Hopefully, people are refreshed and ready to go for part two. Yeah, lots of information thrown at you in part one. Please keep the questions coming to the Q&A function. I can see Caroline has joined us. Brilliant, Caroline. Can you take control and take us through the actual shared standards themselves? Thank you very much.
Yes, hello everyone, and yeah, thanks to the presenters so far. Hopefully, you're finding it very informative. My name's Caroline Sutton. I'm a senior planning advisor in the national team at the Environment Agency. We've been working closely with colleagues in the EA, Natural England, and the water companies as we developed the shared standards. So yes, I'm just going to, on behalf of the group, just provide an overview of the shared standards, following on from what you've heard so far. So, as you know, the shared standards cover the Water Resources East area, and you know already quite a lot about some of the environmental pressures that this part of the country sees when it comes to water scarcity. At the beginning, you also had a really good overview of the written ministerial statement that Michael Gove gave in December 2023. That looked at that committed to introducing tighter standards for water efficiency in building regulations, but also encourages local planning authorities to set more stringent standards in their local plans, particularly if they are in areas of water stress. And another thing that the written ministerial statement said as well is that the Environment Agency would put support in this. So Michael Gove didn't sort of elaborate on how we should support, but one of the ways we are trying to support with this is producing guidance such as this to provide that overview, as well as providing advice on individual applications as well. So it really is a sort of a bit of a landmark moment, really, in the policy framework around the capability for local plans to set more stringent standards than building regulations, and quite an important step forward in terms of the government steer that sort of allows local plans to set more stringent standards. So as we've already outlined, and I won't dwell on this too much, but just as a recap, I think the presentations from colleagues at the Environment Agency and Natural England have really clearly indicated the pressures there are in terms of water supply. So there are pressures around environments in terms of vulnerable environmental features, protected habitats, valued water bodies and rivers and streams that are very vulnerable to water scarcity. And with growing pressures of growth and the impacts of climate change, those pressures are only going to get more and more stark and more difficult to deal with. So in terms of the overall background, in terms of where we're going with planning for water across the area, there is, if you like, a gap between the pressures we're seeing now with insufficient water for growth and protect the environment, but at the same time, there is a gap between what's coming forward in terms of strategic supply options. So we do know that water companies are working very hard to provide long-term supplies options that will increase the water supply available for growth. So the Grafham transfer, which is going to supply Cambridge, is going to be arriving with us in 2032. There's going to be a Fens reservoir in the 2030s. Between now and then, we really want to protect the environment and we really want to support growth. So our option is to really make the very best of the water that we've got available that does both of those things. So it protects the environment and supplies growth. So we've got to be really, really efficient. So efficiency is under this term demand management that's used, and it encompasses a number of things like fixing leaks, but also making sure that we use water as efficiently as possible in developments. And it's going to be a really, really key feature between now and the 2030s that we do make the very, very most of that. So it's really important that developments coming forward now are as efficient as possible so we can get more growth for that water available that's coming forward. Alongside the pressures that we've got and what the water resources management plans are planning for, as already outlined, there are some pressures when it comes to developments that don't fall within the duties that water companies have to supply. So non-domestic growth. So a large proportion of non-domestic growth between now and those supply options coming forward in the 2030s. There won't be enough water for them unless we can make more of the water that we've got. And that's the critical thing going forward now. We want sustainable growth. We want homes, we want jobs, we want commercial development. There are lots of new things coming along that are really critical infrastructure to support the growth of our towns and cities, things like data centres. All these things are coming forward, and we really, really need to make sure that we're able to support the sustainable mix of growth that we need. And it's really important, therefore, that water that's used for housing is as efficient as possible, as well as water that's used for non-domestic uses, so they can come forward and we can have that right mix of development between now and the 2030s and those supply options coming forward. So in terms of the approach that's in the shared standards, we've tried to take very much an evidence-led approach to the approach that we're taking here in terms of the standards that we are recommending. So we're recommending that residential development is designed to between no more than 85 litres per person per dwelling per day. Sorry, per person per day, not per dwelling. Up to around 95. And what we found is that when we're looking at the feasibility and the viability of setting water efficiency, what is available in terms of the technology and the cost, and what's also been implemented in practice in developments already, we feel that 85 to 95 is an achievable range. And we've set a range because we recognise that local authorities across this region are very diverse. Yes, the environmental risks are fairly consistent across the region, and the water available and the pressures are fairly consistent across the region. But of course, each area will have different levels of growth demands, and each area will have different levels of land values, and therefore that can affect viability. So it's really important that we try to set a policy approach that had flexibility, and we're really keen to work with you as you use the guidance and apply it in your locality to then work within that range and set something that you think in terms can work as a threshold that is in line with the environmental risks, the growth pressures, the viability and feasibility challenges. And that's what we've tried to do through the information that we provide across the shared standards. So that's the household aspect. The other aspect is water efficiency for non-household development, and we're advising use of achieving full credits in the BREEAM water calculator. And then alongside that, looking to include water reuse, water saving measures, policies around that also as part of commercial development, so non-household development. For the reasons we've outlined already, at the moment, the ability to achieve water reuse within household development is difficult. It's not a blanket approach that can be achieved. However, it's something that we can promote and use much more widely in non-household development. And so there are some clear opportunities to work with developers, particularly those that fall within that bracket of non-domestic. So they're the developments that the water companies don't have to supply. It's really important they're as water efficient as possible in order to be able to operate and be able to get the supply that they need. Let's go to the next slide. So the shared standards in itself. So it's split into two main parts. The overarching document that sets out the context, it sets out the recommendations and also a draft policy. And then it links to a number of annexes that provide the justification for that draft policy. So in terms of the draft policy, and I've noticed some comments in the Q&A, and they're all really, really good questions. the draft policy that we've produced is based on the policy that's been adopted in Crawley. Crawley is affected by water neutrality. We've had to adapt that policy wording into something that would work in a more generic context. So it's wording that has been agreed by an inspector through the local plan process. That's one local plan in one location. We're really closely looking at what's happening in other places and what gets adopted, because we all know in the world of policy writing, it's an art form, it evolves. In every place, it needs to be a bit different. So it's very much there as a template. It's been provided in very good faith as something that we think is a workable starting point, but we want to work with you with it. We want to see how this works in practice. We need to think about how we can improve that policy wording, how we can provide different policy wording for different contexts. So it's really important that what we're presenting here, the spirit of it is taken forward, that this is something that we're working with and moving together. This change that Michael Gove brought forward was at the end of December, the end of 2023 in December. So it's not really been that long since it's been in place, and that local authorities have been able to sort of take this switching approach. We're very much in the days of the infancy days of it, really, because policy development does take a long time. So we want to move forward with this. We could have held back and produced the standards that we thought were perfect and taken 2 or 3 years to do it once we'd seen how practice had evolved. But we didn't want to do that, because we want to start helping you take action now. And that's the spirit of what we want to do here. So we're trying to put something out there that hopefully provides a good starting point to build on, to work with you. And we're really committed to updating the guidance, updating all aspects of it, because things are going to change. Building regs will change. There'll be changes in how the supporting evidence, the environmental evidence will change. The feasibility around different technologies of water efficiency will change as well. So we've got to keep agile and keep moving with this. It stayed still for far too long. And this is exactly what's in the annexes. So everything that you heard at the start of the presentation that talked about the different pressures in the different areas, that's all provided across annexes A and B. They provide the evidence around the environmental pressures and why it's really important that development is as water efficient as possible, because if it isn't, there's not going to be water for the growth that we need going forward. And so that evidence should provide a really important starting point that really sets the justification that helps inspectors think, yes, this area does need to find more water from somewhere, and therefore it's justifiable to do this to protect the environment, to support growth. Then Annex C, we've provided information around the feasibility and viability of water efficiency standards. So this sort of sets out what we know already about the technologies to support achieving different levels of water efficiency from 85 to around 95. So we know that those products are about there and within reasonable cost. And then also some further information around supporting viability, such as what the water companies can offer in the region around supporting developments with the costs of delivering higher standards of water efficiency. And then finally, Section D just provides some further policy framework. We know that the written ministerial statement has been a game changer in terms of that shift from having to stick with building regulations to move to something that's more ambitious. But there are lots of other policy and legislative drivers there that can support more water efficient policies. So what we want to do here is really get across that we want to use the shared standards in a way to ensure there's more water available for both the environment and to support growth going forward. This is the critical thing that we want to drive from this. And we think that certainly using the shared standards as a basis in terms of the evidence it provides and the approach it sets out, we've got a starting point to work with. And the critical thing now, as I've said before, is trying to apply this in practice, We want to improve it where we get the feedback that shows it needs to improve and change. Where there are evidence gaps, what can we do as organisations to fill those evidence gaps? Where there are gaps in feasibility and viability information, how can we work with other partners, including government, to encourage them to provide and fill those gaps? How can we improve planning policy and legislation to also provide the support that you need to be able to develop policies that help support water efficiency that can then support growth? So I'm just going to hand over now to Liam or Gemma just to talk about how the Environment Agency in their local area will help you apply the shared standards.
Yeah, so the shared standards for us, it's very much kind of an expectations guide. It's a what we would like to see from you. We're not going to give you this document and send you away to write your local plan without us. We want you to have a look at it. Obviously, with your evidence base, that is key. There's been talk of integrated water management strategies in the chat, which I'm absolutely enjoying. At the very least, your local plan would need to be supported by an up-to-date water cycle study. And then you come to us and we can have that conversation about where within the shared standards your local authority thinks you fit and how far you think you can go with water efficiency targets and what that looks like. So I'm one of the planners with the Environment Agency, and then I've got an absolutely enormous raft of technical experts behind me who I will talk to. So if there's anything missing from the shared standards, please come ahead and talk to us. If there's anything else you'd like to see, and then if you don't know who your dedicated local authority Environment Agency advisor is, again, come and talk to us, because you should have a named person at the Environment Agency to talk to about your local plan, and we will still be providing bespoke responses to all local plans. So it's just, yeah, basically it's an idea ahead of when you're doing your local plan, when you're preparing your evidence base. This is what we'd like you to see from you. And now I'll hand over to Louise.
Yeah, so you'll be grateful to know that this is the last slide. So you finished with me. So Natural England, as I said earlier, it's for LPAs to determine if the plan meets the legislative requirements for nature recovery with respect to water requirements for your growth. But it needs to be informed by a water cycle study or some form of assessment, ideally an integrated water cycle study that looks at flood and drought. And there's guidance obviously on .gov of how to do that, and that link to that .gov guidance is in the shared standards. This is the most critical part for us, for Natural England. Otherwise, we're not quite sure how you would meet your evidence requirements if you haven't actually assessed what the environment needs with regard to all those duties that are set out, and all the duties that are set out in Annex D of the shared standards. And there's a link to the guidance on water cycle studies, as I said. The standards are our starting point for a conversation on your local plans. However, we won't be able to provide you the sort of advice that the EA can, because we just don't have capacity, and it's not actually our remit, and the experts are in the EA and in the water companies. So we will be referring in our advice on your local plans to do with water scarcity, we will be referring to the shared standards. We will be saying they are one way of meeting the local nature recovery obligations for water scarcity. And earlier I set out why we're able to take this approach and why we're able to not have to require that we give you advice on all applications, and that is about the plan-led approach and that licensing policy. We're able to take this strategic approach because of the plan-led approach and those license amendments. But as set out in the shared standards, you will enable that plan-led approach if you can adopt the policies in the shared standards. And that's it.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. Right, what I'm going to do at this stage, if I just take control of the slides and move us on to the panel session. So yeah, people have been kind of posting all kinds of very interesting questions, both to the chat and the Q&A function. Please keep them coming, because we've got another half an hour or so where I'm going to invite everybody that's spoken so far to turn their cameras on, and I'll start to field questions from the audience and perhaps point to certain people. So I think the first question, in fact, if I just drop the slides now. The first question is simply, I think, from Natalie. So are we now in a situation where we can go beyond 110 litres per person per day, so and adopt a tighter standard in local plans? Is that what we're saying categorically?
Would you like me to take that?
Yes, please, Caroline. Yeah, that'd be great.
Yes, we are. And we know that a number of local authorities are already taking this approach in their draft local plans. Certainly, I think it's pretty clear from Michael Gove's statement that they should look to set more stringent water efficiency standards. Yes, it was under the previous government, but the written ministerial statement still has exactly the same weight. Certainly, conversations I've had with the department with MHCLG is that they're keen to proceed with that approach. As always, planning is an evidence-led process, as you all know, as well as I do, and that the critical thing is coming up with that evidence for the need that justifies it, and then being clear that it's going to work. So is it feasible? Is it viable? And we're starting to provide the tools through the shared standards, and we want to work with you to really make sure at a local level you can make a stronger case as possible for a standard that works that is as stringent as possible. And hopefully we're hoping with time we can make these standards better. We want to improve everything about them. We just need things to progress more, in the outside world, other things that aren't so much in our control, but we know they will happen, and we will be able to improve it with time.
Yeah,
it's also worth mentioning the 10-point action plan on water efficiency. It doesn't quite say what we wanted, but in that environmental improvement plan that I showed you at the beginning, there is a 10-point action plan on water efficiency, which is at some point going to be updated. And one of the things is a commitment to consultation on the building regs, and a commitment to a consultation on looking at those fixtures and fittings regulations that stop water recycling, and a number of other things. So those are policy commitments in the EIP. The EIP is being updated by the government, but we do know that Minister Reid has reinforced the 20% reduction target in water requirements. That we do know is not being removed. So so that there are commitments, and of course we know that mandatory water efficiency labelling, which will make water efficiency easier to enforce, is coming as well. We know that's been consulted on. It's been imminent now for 4 months, but it is imminent.
Yes. I've heard it's going to be certainly introduced by the end of 2025. So hopefully, the sooner the better. But can I just pick up a question in the chat from Ian Withington, I think it was, who just mentioned that they tried to go for tighter than 110, and the planning inspectorate again had kicked it out and said, no, you can't go for more than 110. I haven't got any further details than that, but I guess the question is, so what are we doing with the planning inspectorate to make sure that they're aware both of that written ministerial statement and of these shared standards? So hopefully they will change their attitude towards some of these, planning authorities wanting to go further. Again, can I point to Caroline first, and perhaps you can fill in?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, and we'd have to sort of try to understand the inspector's view of that in terms of the position that they took. As I said, we feel very confident that going beyond 110 is possible, and it has been achieved, and it is being sought through other local authorities. But it needs to be evidence led and justified, and maybe that's where the inspector didn't feel convinced. We have tried to reach out to planning inspectorate, and we'll continue to do that. We can certainly look to have conversations with them. The planning inspectorate have training sessions every year. We can offer to speak to them about that as one of their training sessions. So yeah, certainly we do want to work with planning inspectors with this. We certainly don't want to leave it until we're in examination until we start trying to test some of these principles with them, because
Yes.
it's important.
And
Well,
I think
actually,
it
so
is worth saying that we're the first Environment Agency area to do this. So we are the test case, and we are going to be the first to do things, and that's great. We're happy to do that.
yeah, and I think why we've got so many people on the call today is partly, other parts of the country looking to the east to see what lessons they can learn and hopefully to take it and apply it, even in Wales as well as England too. But just to also, I should have introduced Tessa. Tessa Saunders has joined the panel because, do you want to introduce yourself briefly, Tessa?
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Hi, I'm Tess Saunders, Spatial Planning Manager at Anglian Water, and I'm involved with local plans, particularly in the east of our region, and I have engaged with a number of the people on the call on responses on local plans and promoting water efficiency, including in North Norfolk, which, yes, was disappointing, even though we did try and support them, that the planning inspector, but obviously it's an advance of the shared standards, and hopefully now this document's place, it will give a sort of clearer steer for the planning inspector going forward.
Right. Okay. Because I was going to ask, you've got experience of taking local plans or supporting that examination process for local plans. So what do you think the difference will be now these shared standards are out? How will this help planning authorities get these local policies over the line?
I think it's having the clear evidence and demonstrating there's already policies in place. I mean, we've tried persistently to sort of go beyond 110 and encourage 100, and we have got 100 litres per person per day in some plans. So I think West Norfolk, for example, Kingsland and West Norfolk have got a policy for one of their large urban extensions to go to 100, and Tendring and Colchester Borders Garden Community have also included 100. So we've been making small steps, but I think the evidence sort of presented today to support the shared standards will go a long way, to help underpin a sort of stronger policy approach. And I think, all of us on the panel today are would support local planning authorities once they get to examination to underpin any sort of policy approach that goes beyond those tighter standards. So we just don't want to abandon local planning authorities and say, put this in and on you go. We're happy to support them in examination as well.
Perfect. Yeah. And we heard from the Environment Agency about what support they can provide to planning authorities, also from Natural England. Just one quick question, Caroline. Is there a charge attached to your advice to planning authorities, or is this part of the service?
I'll let the area answer that question, but I think it's no.
Liam, Gemma?
Yeah, so we do offer advice through our planning advice service, which we can speak to each individual council about. We do offer like free introductory meetings for things like water cycle studies and stuff like that. So we can open the conversation, and obviously, as Gemma was saying earlier, each local authority within our area should have a named contact who I'm sure would be more than happy to pick up the phone and speak about any questions you may have.
Yeah,
perfect.
I mean, I think a lot of the time it's dependent on the level of the advice as well and the detail. If we're writing a policy for you, we're probably going to have to charge for that. But if we're having a conversation about what a policy should look like, then let's do that.
Yeah, that makes complete sense. Alice, I can see Sarah Baumer's got her hand up. She's from Essex and Suffolk Water. Could you change her status from attendee to presenter, just in case she wants to come in on this? But also, so we've heard from Natural England and the Environment Agency about how they can support planning authorities. Again, probably a question for Tess about, so what can water companies do to support planning authorities individually as they develop these policies and get them through examination?
I think we're happy to support wherever we've got lots of information from our, a water resources management plan. We can provide information, and I think George mentioned about our environmental incentives as well for developers. That's obviously at developer stage, but it obviously improves viability in terms of sort of promoting more water efficient development. So we're happy to provide evidence where we've got it, and obviously we sort of work closely with enabling water smart communities, and there's lots of evidence coming forward from that project all the time, which further underpins the shared standards. So where we've got the evidence, we're happy to share that with local planning authorities going forward.
Yeah, brilliant. It's so interesting because we've clearly got a fantastic range of experience and expertise on the call. So Richard Kay is pointing out that the Environment Agency have a duty to cooperate with local planning authorities, and you shouldn't charge for any advice given under that duty to cooperate. I don't know, Liam nodding. Did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, just to reassure that we are here and open to conversations, and we wouldn't charge for anything as part of the statutory local plan responses that we provide. So yeah, we are here. It's more for bigger documents like water cycle studies and integrated water management plans. That's when we would need to go a little bit further. But general,
yeah, makes
or
sense.
Caroline, if you have anything else to
Yeah,
jump in.
we've been told that if we're going to provide that technical advice, detailed technical advice on documents, we have to recover our costs. So we've been told that by central government, and that's what we're doing.
Yeah, I don't know if there's something on gov.uk that we can maybe point to that sets it out, because it's not entirely straightforward, unfortunately.
No, it's
so
complicated.
We'll see if we can dig something out and provide a link to something that explains it, but it isn't. It's unfortunately a little bit complicated.
Yeah, Sarah, I think, yeah, you've been enabled. Sarah, did you want to come in on this point? Do you want to introduce yourself and say hello? Just need to unmute yourself and you should be okay.
Fab. Thank you very much, Daniel. Yes, thanks everybody for presenting on our behalf. I'm Sarah Bauman, I'm from Essex and Suffolk Water, and I'm a local authority liaison officer. I've been working with quite a few councils now on water cycle studies, local plans, planning applications, etc. But on the sort of question about how water companies can support local plan policies, I just thought it might be timely to introduce the fact that most water companies, I think all water companies actually, have got environmental incentives for developers to build at lower levels. So we have an environmental.
What's yours?
Well, it's 100 at the moment, and we recognise it's not as low as 95 or 85, but I've had discussions with the team, and you're only allowed to change them once a year, and that's April. So we're going to move ours down to tighter, probably 95 next year. But it does sort of show the commitment of what level of PCC we'd like developers to be building to and encouraging them to build to. And I think that could be cited by local planners if necessary, that water companies are looking at things like that. Yeah,
no, absolutely. And there's also the Future Homes Hub itself that I think, was it George, you posted to the chat again? They, very similarly talking in the range of 80, 90, 100 litres per person per day. So it's definitely in that range. And it's important to note that the Future Homes Hub was developed by the Home Builders Federation. As I understand it, they were one of the key parties in developing that roadmap towards tighter water efficiency standards. So to at least a degree, clearly developers are on side on this. But can I just ask that question, and maybe for George, actually, about, so what do developers think of this? Are they ready to deliver to 85, somewhere between 85 and 95?
So every conversation I've had with developers today, and there was a question there noting the fact that there was a lack of developers on the call, but I can tell you now, we are having the discussions. Every time we have this, it is that's lovely, George, but make me do it. And it is a case of make them do it. Now we are dangling carrots to encourage, but the stick is going to be the only route to do this ultimately, and that's where policy is going to be key. It's not a lack of interest, and it's not that they're not averse to doing it. Some of them are seeing the lay of the land and what's coming forward, and are happy to be proactive and address this. And there are a number of developers that are even encouraging, master developers that are requiring house builders to do so on their land. But yeah, it's not through the fact that they can't. It's just ultimately, there is an additional cost. It will unlikely be huge amounts, but make them do it.
I was going to say, so that's really clear. And I think, as I say, from developers' point of view, what they don't want is a kind of uneven playing field. They don't want to be at additional, placed into additional costs voluntarily when they know their competitor is perhaps not kind of faced with the same standards. But there are questions, including from Melanie, about viability. So, and that comes down to the cost of this. So what more can you say about the cost of moving from, let's say, 110 to 100 to something like 85?
So I can I can assure people on this call that has been a viability assessment done by central government around, but not, it may well just be on the 100 mark, and that will be released with the building regs consultation as and when. In terms of getting down to 90, there's a number of ways in which to achieve 90 and below, and obviously we've laid some of that out within the report. I would refer to the Future Homes Hub at this point, that document that was published last year or year before, in fact, which gives an indication of the scale of. We have focused in on the sort of the next point, which is going to be when you incorporate reuse and what the opportunities and the costs associated with that are. And I think, the more evidence we can gather on terms of cost of achieving 85, 90, 95 would be the better. And there are examples out there, and I think we just need to gather those together. Obviously, we put together a model spec within this, but we haven't necessarily included the additional cost in this.
Makes
just
sense.
on the environmental incentives piece, actually, Daniel. We're just about to publish a piece of work for enabling water smart communities. It's out on my desk to sign off, unfortunately. But it summarises what everyone is doing across the country in terms of environmental incentives, and then we're looking to try and standardise what, if it says we want you to do reuse, what the minimum requirements are. So some are saying, some water companies are going, well, if you put in a 100-litre water butt, that's sufficient to be able to tick that, and you can release £800. And some are saying, well, actually, you need to be able to flush every single toilet in the dwelling with reusable water. So there needs to be some consistency, and working for enabling water smart communities, we're doing that at the minute. We've got a summary document that's about to be launched, and then we're working through what those standardisation of what the requirements are.
That sounds really, really useful. Yeah, that sounds great. Louise, you've got your hand up.
Yeah. So, because I cover national, I happen to sit on a number of Sussex North and national forums where developers are, including enabling water smart communities. But last Friday, I gave a presentation on the shared standards to the people who work to Future Homes Hub and a group of developers, and we had a discussion around it. And the first thing was, there's no requirement for offsetting here, and all developers will tell you that is the bit that they're finding them virtually impossible to do. So that was the main thing. And so I asked about, John Slaughter from Future Homes asked the developers, and bear in mind, these are the people building the houses to 85 litres, have been doing for the 4 years that the position statement has been in Sussex North. They said almost all developers have been able to achieve the 85. There are some that have only been able to achieve 90. So, and that is the experience of actual developers. But the thing they've struggled with is the offsetting, and there's no requirement for offsetting in this. So that's the actual experience of those developers. So it's worth. As I say, we were discussing it with developers. They have been involved in Future Homes Hub. They're partners. Taylor Wimpey, you saw all those in enabling water smart communities, and the evidence and the costs. Some of it is pulled out from all this document. It's pulled out in a user-friendly way in the annex under viability, because I know lots of people won't have had a chance to look at the annexes, but the data is there, and links to the Future Homes Hub report is there, and the links to the evidence is there, but we've pulled out the evidence in a way that makes it, I think, easier to find, because they're quite long, some of these documents, and we don't expect LPAs to be able to read. And the reason you couldn't do this before, when Tessa was doing, was it North Norfolk, was because a lot of this data has been published in the last 6 months. Not all of it, but a lot of it. So we didn't have the evidence that we've got now.
Yeah, that's brilliant. And can I don't know if it's for you or someone else, but there's a question from Kimberly about the standard, the 85 litres per person per day doesn't include baths. I think there's nothing attached to the water use from bathing. Is that because baths these days they're less frequently used? Does anybody want to comment on that? If not, I'll turn to Caroline, because I think, did you want to come in on something else? You're on mute, Caroline.
I was going to say why baths aren't included, because it's about how deep you fill it, which has got nothing to do with the design of the bath. It's to do with your choice. And the thing about the bath would be the taps, and there is stuff on taps and flow rates.
Right.
But your bath is how deep you fill it, and that's a personal choice. So that's not a fixtures and fittings. And also, shower use is much more common. But the taps for the bath are in there.
Well, I was going to pick up this point actually about, in the building regulations at the moment, you've got this choice between the water calculator and taking a fittings-based approach. So are we promoting the fittings-based approach as a way to achieve 85 and to demonstrate 85, or is there still a possibility to use the calculator? Who wants to talk about that?
I'm happy to come onto that.
Yeah, please. Yeah.
Like. I mean, I'm certainly not an expert on this matter, but I've spoken quite extensively to Environment Agency experts on this, and certainly we think you get better outcomes from a fixtures fittings approach rather than the water calculator. And I think with the introduction of the mandatory water labelling system that's coming in, I think sort of by the end of this year. That's going to do two things. It's going to make it easier for that approach, which we think is more robust. It gets better outcomes because ultimately it's great to have a water efficiency standard and say a developer will meet it, but if it's in practice uses more water, it's not really good to us because the water's been used. So there's that point as well. But the second point is that once that's in place, that will drive technologies and improvements and lower the costs for these things, because ultimately with time, certain poor performing you won't be allowed to sell poor performing appliances that use too much water, and it'll be really clear and simple to see, well, that's an A rated or that's a B rated or whatever, and the choices can be made, and it can be made a lot more simply and a lot more efficiently. So hopefully that helps answer that question. I'll let others come in there.
Well, I was going to ask you, I don't know if again this is for you, but once water labelling does come in, there's an A to G rating, let's say. Should we switch the shared standards to basically say just fit A-rated appliances, just fit A-rated taps, toilets, dishwashers, washing machines?
It will certainly offer the opportunity to do that. Let's not make decisions too quickly. I don't decide for everyone now, but it certainly would make a lot of sense to do that, because let's face it, we want to do this as simply and as efficiently as possible. And that to me feels like a simple and efficient approach. And this is why I said before, there are improvements on the horizon that we can make to this, as well as taking your feedback that we can improve it on as well. So this is why it's a moment in time, and things will only get better and easier.
Yeah, George, then Gemma.
Yeah, just on, I'm going to refer to it as MWELS if that's okay, but this is the mandatory water efficiency labelling scheme that's due to come into force very shortly. It actually aligns with, I believe, Councillor Thornberry asked the question around actually enacting it. How do you police a policy of around 110 or less? Well, ultimately, I think that's where the joys of MWELS will come in, as it's very difficult to actually measure the fixtures and the flow rates and volumes used within fixtures and fittings within the home. We've tried doing it on a number of occasions, and actually, although you can do the taps and showers, it's quite difficult to work out the how much water is coming out of a toilet cistern, and how much, as you say, the bath would be filled to. As soon as we get those, actually, it makes far more sense to be aligning policies with those. But as you say, Caroline, let's wait to see exactly what comes out with MWELS, which we believe is due to be laid in front of Parliament towards, I think it's November is what they've suggested at this present time.
Yeah.
So I would sincerely hope that we could adjust it, and that would make everything so much easier, both in terms of auditing such things, and we would be following suit when it comes to environmental incentives from offering from water companies, as it just makes everything a lot easier.
But who are you saying would go out then to check? Because at the moment, I think it is self-certified by the plumbers themselves that this is, a 5 litre.
So in terms of policy, you say building regs. If building regs aligns nicely, then building control could do it. If we offer an incentive, then we will be going out and auditing the approval, the adherence to that. When it gets down to local planning policy going beyond building regs, then I think that's a slightly grey area that needs to be discussed as to who's assessing that side of things. What I can say, though, is it's going to be a lot easier than turning up with your flow cup, your tape measure and your stopwatch. that if you could use, because ultimately in the same way that, we are assessing the thickness of insulation and asking them to prove their depths, and, and also going around and ensuring that certain appliances are energy efficient, we're going to be doing exactly the same when it comes to water. And it's a lot easier to look at the stickers and the letters that have been allocated to it than doing the measuring. So
yeah, Gemma, you've been waiting for a while.
Yeah, just get myself off mute this time. Yeah, I mean, I think the conversation that's going on in the chat is fantastic. And I'm really enjoying this. I think that actually we want the feedback. We want to hear what you think of the policy. We're probably not going to redraft this tomorrow because we've only just published it and we need a bit of time. But I mean, I can remember, I'm quite young in the Environment Agency, and I can remember a colleague celebrating that she got 110 litres as a local plan policy. And now we're asking for more. And I think water resources is a bigger part of my role now than I ever would have expected it to be even 4 years ago. So I think let's continue the conversation. Let's keep talking. Let's keep improving, and then we'll get to where we need to be. I mean, I think, yeah, we can only strive to be better.
We did have one question just to clarify from Annabelle. So what if a new housing development is served by a new appointment evaluation company as opposed to the incumbent wholesaler? Is there a different approach, or does this basically apply to the whole region, including whether served by NAVs or by the incumbents? Tess, do you want to say that?
I would say if it's in the policy, then it applies to whether it's a NAV or whether it's the incumbent water company. The same policy, yeah. It's a it's a district-wide policy and a local plan, so it'll apply whatever.
And
I mean, obviously the water company supplies a bulk supply agreement, and we work with the NAVs. So
the extraction,
I see Annabelle say she didn't mean NAV. I mean, if it's a private borehole and water supply, I mean that comes down to the EA, I suppose. But I mean, the extraction is up to 20 meters cubed a day, isn't it, without a permit? So I'm not sure how that works, but that's for EA colleagues, I guess.
One question. So for a while, people have been talking about water companies having a statutory, not a duty, but kind of you become a statutory consultee on individual planning applications. But you are a statutory consultee on local plans. That's right, correct, as I understand it. As of course is Natural England Environment Agency. So one question from Adrian Cannard, who has left, but a great question is: are you going to start to object to local plans if they don't adopt 85 litres per person per day? Who wants to take that one first? Liam, shall I get you to come in?
Yeah, I think we're kind of saying that this is a starting point for where we'd expect the conversation to begin. The shared standards themselves include a wide range of different viability options, and we remain open to speaking with local planning authorities and the development of their local plans. I think another thing that's really important is things like doing water cycle studies and integrated water management strategies to ensure you've got that evidence base to support whatever policy position that you take. So I think that's the key piece of information. We accept it needs to be evidence based, and we're here to help as much as we can.
Yeah. Okay. Sarah, I think you want to come in, Sarah?
Yes, please. I was really just going to reiterate what Liam's just said, is the fact that we'd hope that we'd work with local councils early on in the planning process to sort of do the water cycle studies and all the sort of background information gathering and working out what's right for that locality before they got to, deciding whether they're going, or before adoption. There's a long process in the planning process to get to the actual adoption of a local plan, and we'd hope that we'd have agreed a planning policy on water efficiency before it got to that stage. Yeah. So we wouldn't have to object. That's what I'm trying to say.
No, that makes complete sense. And of course, let's not forget that the Michael Gove statement also allowed planning authorities to negotiate tighter standards on a development by development basis. And I know that's been used in Cambridge quite a bit. But let's not forget non-household.
We're doing that now. Sorry, we are doing that now with some of the really big developments. We're sort of talking to councils and saying, you really need, if you're going to build thousands and thousands in that area, then we need them as water efficient as possible. And Absolutely. To be fair to the councils, they're very open to that, because they need the support to be able to go to their councillors and planning committees and saying, giving evidence of why they want to say that. But most of them are actually very open to more stringent water efficiency policies, which is great to see.
Definitely. And let's not forget the non-household consumption here, because I think Jonathan was saying earlier, massive increase in non-household water use in Cambridge Water as well. And of course, there's a moratorium in parts of Essex and Suffolk. But so we mentioned that we're proposing full credits under the BREEAM water calculator. Is that, if I use the right term here, the BREEAM water calculator full credits? Can anyone say what that actually means in practice? Are we getting into water reuse, or is it just about fittings and water efficiency?
There's two types of non-household. There's the domestic, which use water the same way we do in houses, so taps, showers, toilets, and that's what BREEAM applies to, and it's a water efficiency standards, and it's a rating that rates the sustainability. But the other element is non-domestic use, and that's where the requirement for water efficiency is, because for domestic use, for the reasons that George set out, there's currently policy and legislative barriers for domestic use, even in non-household, for household recycling, greywater recycling. But for domestic use, there's no barriers, so we can be more efficient in non-domestic, non-household. We can be more efficient. Hence the policy proposals to be more efficient.
So I'm just wondering, how can planning authorities help businesses wanting to set up or expand in their areas make sure they are kind of water efficient in that kind of process water use for cooling or for dust suppression or in kind of the manufacturing process? Is there any levers that local authorities have through the local plan to do that?
I think it's very much about being clear that the developers need to be having these conversations early. They need to be talking to the water company early, and they need to be making sure that there is the water available. And those conversations need to be had, and that's what we can say at the moment.
Well, yeah. And as Jonathan said, actually there is no water for growth in that kind of processed water needs beyond 20 cubic meters per day. And that's a standard approach to kind of water rationing that's now in place across the Anglian Water region, across the Cambridge Water zone, as well as, I say, kind of formal moratorium in water use. And George, are you going to be promoting the water reuse, non-potable water reuse opportunities report that came out just recently?
Yeah, so I've just put it in the chat for people who haven't clocked it yet. So there was a National Framework for Water Resources document that was published probably a month or two ago now, which includes within it a proposed water reuse hierarchy for non-household, as well as looking at potential use options and source and use options. And ostensibly the hierarchy goes: use your rainwater, then use your grey water stroke trade effluent, then look at local potential non-potable supplies before you even think about potable water for non-potable purposes. Basically trying to lay it very clear now that we can't be using potable world-class drinking water for uses that don't require it because of that. And then I think, we would urge and encourage those on the line to be considering that as your positioning going forward. We as a water company are going to be doing so, certainly when it comes to those non-households going forward, and are encouraging other water companies to do similar. It's only that we happen to be drafting that document initially, but other water companies have signed up to it too. So
yeah, and Luke has just asked in the chat, what does this mean about data centres? And I think what we're saying is that essentially there's a de facto ban within the Anglian Water region on using potable water for data centres because there are alternatives available. Yeah, there might be cases where that happens, but is that essentially the position, George?
Yeah, I think I'm loath to say ban, but I would say that we're working very closely with the data centre groupings. And would like to plan with them early doors. Ultimately, data centers don't require water throughout. It just happens to be that it's the choice given that, if you look at the European reports on it, it suggests that we're not water scarce. So they're starting out assuming that the water will be made available that's something that we need to address quite quickly and look at alternative cooling mechanisms and alternative sources. I'm loath to say a ban at the present time, as there may well be no other alternatives and there may be good justification for it, but we will be exploring all alternative sources to ensure that it's not trying to, it's not having a big impact in terms of.
Well, you can't say a ban, but I can say a ban. I think we should ban potable water use in data centers. I've said it many times. It's just a ridiculous use of world-class drinking water, as you put it, George. Caroline, did you want to come in on this point or another?
I think Sarah's had a hand up, so I was just going to let Sarah speak.
Oh, sorry, Sarah, was that on before? That I thought that might have been an old hand. Sorry if I've been ignoring you. I think that might have been
Yeah, it's an old one, so I couldn't unmute myself.
no worries. Yeah,
Caroline. No problem then. Yeah,
thank you.
I was just going to say that when we think about the different developments types, there's housing, there's uses that are classed as domestic, that like schools and hospitals, and then there's the other uses that would fall in this policy of there isn't any water, there's restrictions on water use for them. And I think when we're thinking about something like a data center or offices and things like that fall in that third category, I think that the water efficiency for those will almost look after itself, because they've got no choice to be efficient because they're not going to get the supply. So I think when we're writing a local plan policy, it's important to make developers aware of that, and we've tried to reflect that in the policies, like as a bit of a footnote. But then we think about these domestic uses, which is houses and things like schools and community uses and things like that. We want them to be as efficient as possible, and those community uses, yes, they can follow BREEAM when it comes to the taps and the toilets and the sinks and that sort of thing. But then can they, on top of that, what's their capability to think about water reuse, so they can get a bit more efficient again and support that reduction in use, so there is more water for that whole big picture, and that makes sustainable growth.
Yeah, perfect. Right, we're almost at the top of the hour. So George, I was going to come to you. I was going to basically give everybody one more chance to get something off their chest that they want to say before the end of this webinar. So George, you go first.
I just Daniel, I don't know that everyone's aware on this call that we have a legal obligation to meet residential domestic use, but water companies do not have the same legal obligation to meet it for non-household commercial use. Hence the reason we can be stricter on those.
Yes.
But I would say my main thing, building regs, please mandate at the very least the inclusion of dual piping within new homes, because it will help future-proof them at the very least.
Yeah, perfect. I'm going to go around my screen just for your last point. Liam, should I pick you first? Anything else that you wanted to say or add before we close?
I think the main thing is, please talk to us. We're here. Send us an email. Give us a buzz. Any concerns, just let us know. Here to help.
Yeah, brilliant. Gemma?
Liam said it. Talk to us.
Yeah, superb. Let's go to Louise next then, and then Tess.
So mine is, please talk to the EA and not us, because our staff can't help with water efficiency. They don't have the capacity or the capability, and it's not our remit. But I will be supporting area teams, and I think for the first one of you that goes to examination, that is trying to use these, I personally will probably step in and help with anything to do with HABS regs and assist on those elements of it. So because I think once we've got one through, it'll be easier for everybody else. So whoever goes first is going to get the most support, I think. But yeah, and apologies, we can't offer you any help other than supporting the guys to develop this. But we're tiny.
Well, there's an offer, there's an incentive. So whoever goes first will get the full force of Natural England, as well as the Environment Agency and the water company behind them. So who wants to go first? They want to stick their hand up from a planning authority, say they're basically poised and ready to go. Well, all power to you when you do make that step. Right, Tess, and then we'll finish with Caroline.
Yeah, I think I'd just echo everyone else. Happy to continue conversations on water cycle studies, local plan preparation. It's been really encouraging to see local planning authorities, and the range of local planning authorities turning up today and having the questions, and we're happy to continue with that engagement. And happy to work with the EA and the other water companies, because obviously we don't always cover the full local planning authority for water supply. So yeah, we'll work closely with the other water companies across the region as well and supporting that.
Fantastic. And Caroline.
Yeah, just to say thank you very much for joining and all of your questions. I'm certainly very willing with everyone else to answer the ones we didn't get to. And please keep your questions and queries and feedback coming, because it's the only way that we'll be able to make this guidance better for the next edition. So that's all really. So thanks very much.
Yeah. Well, I think, again, just to emphasize, this is a living document, essentially. It's not going to be updated every week, every month, but as and when developments change, as and when hopefully we successfully see planning authorities adopt tighter standards and use the shared standards, then it makes sense for us to build the case studies, to develop and tighten the standards, including potentially when building regulations does finally come out for consultation, hopefully later this year. And I think I might end with a comment from Councillor Katie Thornborough, Ben, about, because there's standards, there's regulations that's forcing people, but let's also maybe celebrate successes where developments do go forward, they adopt these standards, they build in, they future-proof their homes by having dual supply pipework built in from the outset. Let's have some more awards for those developers who really are taking the step, and the water companies and the regulators that support them too. But just again, from my perspective, thank you ever so much for joining us. We had a brilliant audience, set of questions, superb set of speakers. Thank you again for all your kind of work on the shared standards and also today's launch event. And finally, just to thank Alice Leonard from WE in the background, pushing the buttons, spinning the cogs, making everything work as well and as smoothly as it has. So thank you again, everybody. We'll post this webinar to our website tomorrow, and I look forward to seeing some of these actual standards being adopted in local plans across the entire region. Thank you very much, and good afternoon.
Thanks all. Bye.